Sarah Mitchell adjusted her stethoscope for the third time that morning, her hands steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. To everyone at Clearwater General Hospital, she was just another dedicated nurse who worked the night shift and kept to herself. What they didn't know was that those same steady hands had once been trained to eliminate targets from over a mile away. The morning of October 15th started like any other in the small town of Clearwater, Montana. Sarah had just finished her 12-hour shift and was looking forward to heading home to her quiet cabin on the outskirts of town. She never imagined that by sunset, everything she'd worked to leave behind would come rushing back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign of trouble came at 6:47 a.m., when Sarah was finishing her patient rounds in the pediatric ward. A commotion erupted from the emergency department below, shouting voices, running footsteps, and something that made her blood run cold: the distinctive sound of automatic weapons being chambered. "Everyone stay calm," came a voice over the hospital's intercom system, but it wasn't Dr. Harrison's familiar tone. This voice carried a thick accent and an edge of menace that made Sarah's military training kick into high alert. "This facility is now under our control. Any attempt to leave or contact authorities will result in immediate consequences." Sarah pressed herself against the wall of room 314, her mind instantly cataloging escape routes and defensive positions, skills she'd hoped never to use again. Through the window, she could see black SUVs surrounding the hospital parking lot. Professional. Organized. This wasn't some random act of violence. Down the hallway, she heard her colleague Jenny Martinez whispering frantically into her cell phone. "There are men with guns in the hospital. Send help to Clearwater General immediately." The call cut short as heavy footsteps approached. "Nobody moves," barked a voice in accented English. Sarah peered around the corner to see 3 armed men in tactical gear herding staff and early morning visitors into the main corridor. The leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar running from his left ear to his jawline, spoke into a radio. "Floor 2 secured. Beginning sweep of upper levels." Sarah's heart raced, but her breathing remained controlled. 8 years of service as a Marine Corps sniper had taught her to manage fear, to think clearly when others panicked. She counted at least 12 gunmen on her floor alone, all carrying high-end military equipment. These weren't amateurs. The hospital's layout flashed through her mind like a blueprint. 4 floors, multiple stairwells, an elevator system that could be easily controlled, and over 200 patients who couldn't be evacuated quickly. Many were in critical condition: elderly patients in the cardiac unit, premature babies in the NICU, and post-surgical patients who couldn't be moved without risking their lives. "Attention staff," the voice crackled over the intercom again. "We require your cooperation for the next 24 hours. Continue your duties. Keep your patients alive. Anyone who attempts heroics will be responsible for unnecessary casualties." 24 hours. Sarah's military mind processed this information quickly. This wasn't a robbery or a random attack. They needed the hospital operational for something specific. But what? She slipped into the supply closet, her movements silent despite the chaos erupting around her. Hidden behind boxes of medical supplies, she pulled out her personal cell phone. No signal. They were jamming communications, professional indeed. Through the small window in the supply room, Sarah observed the main parking lot. The positioning of the vehicles, the coordination of the armed teams, the systematic way they'd taken control of each floor, this had the hallmarks of military precision. But whose military? A scream echoed from the emergency department below, followed by Dr. Patricia Chen's voice. "Please don't hurt him. He's just a child." Sarah's jaw tightened. The pediatric ward housed 43 children, ranging from newborns to teenagers. Whatever these people wanted, innocent lives were now caught in the crossfire. She heard footsteps approaching the supply closet and quickly assessed her options. The ventilation grate above led to the hospital's air conditioning system. She'd noticed it during her previous shifts, always unconsciously mapping potential escape routes. Old habits from her military days. The footsteps paused outside the door. Sarah held her breath, her body coiled and ready. The handle turned slowly. "Clear," came a gruff voice as the door swung open. The gunman, a stocky man with cold blue eyes, swept his assault rifle across the room. missing Sarah's position behind the shelving by mere inches. He moved on, unaware that a trained killer was less than 3 feet away. After he passed, Sarah carefully made her way to the nurse's station. The computer systems were still functional, but all external communications had been severed. She accessed the patient database, confirming her worst fears. 247 patients currently in the hospital, with 89 in critical condition who couldn't survive without constant medical attention. The elevator dinged, and more armed figures emerged. Sarah recognized the tactical formation, a sweep and clear pattern designed to secure a building floor by floor. These people had extensive military training. From her position behind the nurse's station, she overheard a radio transmission. Alpha Team, proceed to the surgical wing. Beta Team, secure the pharmacy and blood bank. Gamma Team, establish perimeter on the roof. We need this facility fully operational for tomorrow's arrival. Tomorrow's arrival. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. What kind of arrival would require taking over an entire hospital? She noticed something else troubling. The gunmen were being careful not to damage critical medical equipment. They'd positioned themselves to control movement while ensuring the hospital's essential functions remained intact. This suggested they needed the facility for its intended purpose, treating patients. A child's cry echoed from the pediatric ward, followed by the gentle voice of Dr. Amanda Foster trying to calm her young patients. Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily. She'd left the military to get away from violence, to save lives instead of taking them. But sometimes the past had a way of forcing itself back into the present. Moving carefully through the corridors she knew by heart, Sarah made her way toward the administrative offices. If she could access the building's security cameras, she might be able to determine the full scope of what they were facing. The security office was located in the basement, past the morgue and medical record storage. Sarah had been there once during her orientation, learning about the hospital's emergency protocols. She never imagined she'd need to use that knowledge under these circumstances. As she descended the stairwell, she encountered 2 hospital maintenance workers, Tom Bradley and Miguel Santos, hiding in an alcove. Their faces were pale with terror. "Sarah," Tom whispered, "what's happening up there? We heard gunshots." "Armed men have taken control of the hospital," she replied quietly. "How many ways out of the building do you know?" Miguel's eyes widened. "The loading dock in the basement, the emergency exits on each floor, and there's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the old heating plant across the street." Sarah filed this information away. Multiple exit routes could be crucial, but not if it meant abandoning patients who couldn't be moved. "Stay here and stay quiet," she instructed. "Don't try to be heroes." The security office door was locked, but Sarah's military training had included basic lockpicking skills. Within 90 seconds, she was inside, powering up the surveillance system. The monitors revealed the full extent of the takeover. 37 armed individuals had positioned themselves throughout the hospital. They controlled every entrance, exit, and critical area. But more importantly, Sarah could see their faces clearly for the first time. The leader, the man with the scar, was directing operations from the main lobby. She'd seen that face before, in classified briefings during her military service. Viktor Kozlov, a former Spetsnaz operative turned international mercenary. If Kozlov was involved, this operation had geopolitical implications far beyond a simple hospital takeover. On another monitor, she watched as hospital staff were being gathered in the cafeteria. Dr. Harrison, the chief of staff, was trying to negotiate with the gunmen, his voice carrying through the security system's audio feed. "Whatever you want, we can discuss this reasonably," Dr. Harrison was saying. "But these patients need continuous care. Some of them will die if their treatment is interrupted." Kozlov's response was coldly professional. "Doctor, your patients will receive the best possible care. In fact, we're counting on it. Tomorrow evening, you'll have the opportunity to treat a very important individual. Your hospital's reputation for cardiac surgery is exactly why we're here." Cardiac surgery. Sarah's mind clicked through the implications. Someone was planning to use Clearwater General for a major medical procedure, and they needed the hospital secure and operational. But who would require such extreme measures for medical treatment? The answer came with Kozlov's next transmission. "Confirm arrival time for the package. 0800 hours tomorrow. The patient will require immediate surgical intervention upon arrival." Sarah's blood ran cold. The package was a person. someone important enough to justify taking over an entire hospital. And if they were arriving injured and requiring immediate surgery, it suggested they were fleeing from something or someone. She continued monitoring the feeds, noting guard positions and rotation patterns. Her military training was automatically cataloging weaknesses in their defensive setup, potential ambush points, and methods for taking out key personnel. But she wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a nurse, and her primary responsibility was to the patients under her care. A new voice crackled over the security system, someone speaking in what sounded like Arabic to Kozlov. Sarah's language training allowed her to catch fragments: extraction successful, border crossed, and surgical team ready. The pieces were falling into place. This was an extraction operation, likely for a high-value target who'd been injured during an escape. They needed Clearwater General because of its isolation and the expertise of its cardiac surgery team. Dr. Harrison and Dr. Foster were among the most skilled cardiac surgeons in the region. But why take over the entire hospital? Why not simply request emergency medical treatment? The answer became clear when she heard Kozlov speaking to someone on a satellite phone. Negative. No official involvement. This remains off the books until the asset is stabilized and ready for transport to final destination. Whoever they were treating couldn't be connected to any official medical records or government oversight. This was a black operation, and everyone in the hospital had become unwilling participants. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't contact law enforcement, couldn't evacuate the patients, and couldn't simply hide until this was over. But she could do something these mercenaries wouldn't expect. She could fight back. Moving silently through the basement corridors, Sarah made her way to the hospital's supply areas. In addition to medical equipment, Clearwater General maintained a small security office and emergency supplies. What most people didn't know was that the hospital also stored certain materials that, in the right hands, could be repurposed for tactical applications. The clock on the wall read 8:23 a.m. She had less than 24 hours before whatever was coming arrived. 24 hours to figure out how a small-town nurse could take on a team of international mercenaries. But as she began mentally preparing for what lay ahead, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a grim smile. Viktor Kozlov and his team had made one critical error in their planning. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Sarah's first priority was intelligence gathering. From the basement security office, she mapped out the mercenaries' positions and identified their communication patterns. Each team leader checked in every 15 minutes using military-grade encrypted radios. Their discipline was impressive, but it also created predictable windows of opportunity. The real challenge emerged when she witnessed Dr. Amanda Foster attempting to leave the pediatric ward. Two gunmen immediately blocked her path, and their leader, a woman with short blonde hair and tactical gear, spoke with a slight German accent. "Dr. Foster, you will remain with your patients. Our medic, Klaus Weber, will assist you with any procedures requiring additional hands." "These children need specialized medications that aren't stored on this floor," Dr. Foster protested. "Without their treatments, several will deteriorate rapidly." Sarah watched the interaction through the security cameras, noting the tension building between medical necessity and security protocols. This was exactly the kind of friction that could create opportunities. The German woman, who seemed to be Kozlov's second in command, made a decision that revealed their operational constraints. "Weber will escort you to the pharmacy. 5-minute window, any deviation from the direct route will result in immediate lockdown of the entire pediatric ward." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This told Sarah something crucial. They needed the medical staff functional and cooperative. Complete intimidation would be counterproductive to their mission. They had to balance control with operational necessity. Moving through the maintenance corridors she'd memorized during her night shifts, Sarah made her way to the hospital's central supply area. Her military training had included improvised weapons and explosives, but she needed to be careful. Any large-scale confrontation would put patients at risk. In the supply room, she gathered materials that wouldn't be missed immediately: surgical tubing, cleaning chemicals that could be mixed to create smoke screens, and medical equipment that could serve dual purposes. Her movements were methodical, each item selected for maximum tactical advantage with minimal risk to civilians. The real test came when she encountered Jake Morrison, one of the hospital's security guards, hiding in a storage closet. Morrison was young, maybe 25, and clearly terrified. "Sarah, thank God," he whispered. "I managed to hide when they stormed the security office. My radio's dead, and I can't reach anyone outside." Sarah studied Morrison carefully. He had basic security training but no military experience. However, he knew the hospital's layout and had access to areas she didn't. "Jake, I need you to listen carefully. These aren't random criminals. They're professional soldiers, and they've taken control because they need the hospital for something specific. Fighting them directly would be suicide." Morrison's eyes widened. "Then what do we do? Just wait for the police?" "Communications are jammed. No one outside knows what's happening yet. We need to be smart about this." Sarah made a calculated decision to reveal part of her background. "I have military training. We can help, but only if we work together and follow specific protocols." She assigned Morrison a reconnaissance role, monitoring the mercenaries' patrol patterns and identifying which staff members were being held where. His security clearance allowed him to access areas through maintenance passages that would be useful for intelligence gathering. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on the technical aspects of their situation. The hospital's backup generators were located in the basement, along with the main electrical panels. If necessary, she could create selective power outages to disrupt their communications or create diversions. The mercenaries' next move revealed more about their timeline and objectives. Through the security monitors, Sarah watched as Kozlov directed his teams to begin converting the hospital's main surgical suite into what appeared to be a highly secure operating theater. Dr. Patricia Chen, the anesthesiologist, was being instructed on specific protocols by a man who clearly had extensive medical training. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversation through the audio feed. "The patient will arrive with significant trauma to the cardiovascular system," the man was explaining. "Preparation must include universal blood types, emergency cardiac medications, and a sterile environment suitable for potentially 8 to 12 hours of surgery." 8 to 12 hours. This wasn't a simple medical procedure. Whoever was coming would require major reconstructive surgery, the kind reserved for the most critical cases. Sarah's military experience included field medicine, and she recognized the preparations being described. This sounded like trauma surgery for someone who'd survived an assassination attempt or serious combat injuries. This situation became more complex when she observed the mercenaries establishing what appeared to be a field communications center in the hospital's administrative offices. They were setting up satellite uplinks and secure communication equipment that went far beyond what would be needed for a simple hospital takeover. This was beginning to look like a temporary command center for a larger operation. Jake Morrison returned from his reconnaissance with valuable intelligence. "They've got guards posted at every exit, but they're rotating every hour. The pattern isn't random. They're following professional military protocols." "What about staff movement?" Sarah asked. "They're allowing medical personnel to move between floors if escorted, but only for patient care. Dr. Harrison is being kept in the main lobby, essentially as a hostage to ensure cooperation." Sarah processed this information while formulating her next move. The mercenaries' biggest weakness was their dependence on the hospital staff's cooperation. They needed the medical team functional and motivated to provide quality care for their incoming patient. This created an opportunity, but it also presented a moral dilemma. Any action she took against the mercenaries could result in retaliation against innocent staff and patients. Her solution was to begin subtle sabotage that would appear like equipment malfunctions rather than deliberate interference. She started with the hospital's HVAC system, adjusting airflow to make certain areas uncomfortably warm and others too cold. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to create stress and distraction. The next phase involved the hospital's computer network. Sarah had basic cybersecurity knowledge from her military training, and she began introducing minor glitches into non-essential systems. Elevator delays, flickering lights in non-critical areas, and intermittent problems with the cafeteria equipment. The cumulative effect was to make the mercenaries' job more difficult without creating obvious signs of sabotage. Her efforts were interrupted when alarms began sounding in the intensive care unit. Through the security monitors, she watched as Dr. Foster and 2 nurses rushed to assist a patient experiencing cardiac distress. The patient, an elderly man named Robert Walsh, was one of the hospital's long-term residents. The mercenaries' response to this medical emergency revealed another weakness in their operation. They allowed the medical team to work without interference, but their guard positions meant that response times for genuine emergencies were slower than normal. Sarah realized that medical emergencies created temporary blind spots in their security coverage. If she needed to move between floors or access restricted areas, timing her movements with patient care crises would provide cover. The breakthrough came when she intercepted a radio transmission between Kozlov and an external contact. The conversation was brief and in coded language, but her military training helped her decode the essential information. Package ETA confirmed 0800 tomorrow. Extraction team standing by at secondary location. The medical team briefed on patient requirements. Secondary location. There was an exit strategy already in place. This meant the mercenaries weren't planning to hold the hospital indefinitely. Once their patient was stabilized and ready for transport, they would disappear as quickly as they'd arrived. But it also meant they had backup plans and additional resources outside the hospital. Sarah wasn't just facing the 37 gunmen inside the building. There was an entire support network coordinating this operation. As she continued monitoring their communications and movements, a disturbing pattern emerged. The mercenaries were professionals, but they were also under significant pressure. Their conversations indicated that this operation was time-sensitive and that failure wasn't an option. People under that kind of stress made mistakes. Sarah began planning her next phase of operations, but she was interrupted by a commotion on the third floor. Through the security cameras, she watched as one of the hospital's maintenance workers, elderly Frank Patterson, had apparently suffered a heart attack. The mercenaries' response was immediate and telling. They allowed full medical intervention, even providing assistance in moving Patterson to the cardiac unit. Their mission parameters clearly included maintaining the hospital's medical capabilities at all costs. This confirmed Sarah's assessment. Whoever was coming for surgery was critically important to their organization. Important enough to risk a complex operation and significant resources. But it also gave Sarah an idea for her next move. If medical emergencies created operational gaps, she could use the hospital's patient care requirements against their security protocols. The question was, how far was she willing to go to protect the innocent people under her care? As the afternoon shift change approached, Sarah prepared for the next phase of her plan. She had identified the mercenaries' weaknesses, established communication with Jake Morrison, and begun subtle sabotage operations. But the real test was still ahead. In less than 18 hours, whoever they were expecting would arrive, and Sarah suspected that's when the situation would become truly dangerous for everyone in the hospital. The turning point came at 3:17 p.m. when Sarah discovered the true scope of what they were facing. While monitoring communications from the security office, she intercepted a transmission that made her blood run cold. Nightingale Base, this is Raven 1. Confirm secondary asset extraction in progress. The primary package requires immediate surgical intervention upon arrival. Estimated blood loss is significant. But it was the response that changed everything. Raven 1, be advised. Federal agents have identified the Montana location. You have 12 hours before potential law enforcement response. Execute contingency protocols if necessary. 12 hours. The authorities were coming, but not soon enough. And contingency protocols in military parlance usually meant eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Once their patient was stable enough for transport, Kozlov's team would likely eliminate everyone who could identify them. The hospital staff, the patients, even the children in the pediatric ward, they were all potential liabilities. She had to accelerate her timeline. Moving through the maintenance corridors, Sarah made her way to the hospital's pharmacy. Her military training included field medicine and combat drugs, but she needed something more sophisticated for what she was planning. The pharmacy was guarded by a single mercenary, a younger man who seemed less experienced than the others. Through careful observation, Sarah noted his patrol pattern and identified a 15-second window when he stepped outside to communicate with his team leader. During that window, she slipped inside and gathered specific medications, propofol for sedation, epinephrine for cardiac stimulation, and several other drugs that could serve dual purposes. She also took medical-grade syringes and IV equipment. Her plan was formed: create a medical emergency severe enough to force the mercenaries to make mistakes, while simultaneously setting up opportunities to neutralize key personnel. The first test came when she encountered Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's chief surgeon, being escorted to the converted operating theater. Webb looked exhausted and terrified, but his hands were steady, a surgeon's instinct. "Dr. Webb," Sarah said quietly as they passed in the corridor. "Room 237 in 20 minutes. Tell them you need to check pre-operative supplies." Webb's eyes flickered with understanding. As chief surgeon, he had authority that the mercenaries couldn't easily override without compromising their mission. 20 minutes later, Sarah was waiting in room 237 when Webb arrived with his escort, the same young mercenary from the pharmacy. "Doctor, you have 5 minutes," the guard said, positioning himself by the door. Sarah was hidden behind medical equipment, a syringe filled with a carefully calculated dose of propofol ready. When the guard turned to check the hallway, she moved with the silent precision her military training had drilled into her. The injection was delivered to the guard's neck, a quick pinch that he would attribute to a muscle cramp. Within 30 seconds, he would become disoriented. Within 2 minutes, he would be unconscious. "What the hell?" the guard started to say, but his words slurred as the drug took effect. Webb watched in amazement as Sarah caught the falling mercenary and quickly stripped him of his radio, weapons, and tactical gear. "Who are you?" Webb whispered. "Someone who's going to get us out of this," Sarah replied, securing the unconscious guard with medical restraints. "How many people know about the surgery they're planning?" "The entire cardiac team has been briefed. They're expecting someone with severe chest trauma, multiple gunshot wounds, and extensive cardiovascular damage. Whoever this person is, they're barely alive." Sarah processed this information while changing into the guard's tactical vest and securing his weapon. "Dr. Webb, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane." She outlined her plan. Webb would create a medical crisis that required evacuating patients from the surgical floor. During the confusion, Sarah would eliminate key mercenaries and disrupt their communication network. "This is incredibly dangerous," Webb protested. "If they realize what we're doing..." "Doctor, in 12 hours, federal agents are going to storm this hospital. These people have contingency plans that likely involve eliminating witnesses. We either act now, or we're all dead anyway." Webb's face went pale as the implications sank in. "What do you need me to do?" The next phase required precise timing. Webb returned to the surgical floor and announced that the hospital's central oxygen supply was showing pressure irregularities that could cause explosive decompression in the operating theaters. The mercenaries' response was immediate. They needed those operating rooms functional for their patients. Kozlov himself arrived to assess the situation, bringing his top lieutenant and the German woman Sarah had observed earlier. "How long will it take to resolve this issue?" Kozlov demanded. "Could be 30 minutes, could be 3 hours, Webb replied convincingly. "We need to evacuate critical patients and check every oxygen line in the building." Sarah watched from her concealed position as the mercenaries struggled with a tactical nightmare, maintaining security while allowing large-scale movement of patients and equipment. Their solution created exactly the chaos Sarah needed. They divided their forces, sending teams to escort patient evacuations while maintaining control of key positions. During the confusion Sarah struck, her first target was the communications center they'd established in the administrative offices. Using the stolen access card from the unconscious guard, she entered the room where 2 mercenaries were monitoring radio traffic and satellite communications. The first man never saw her coming. A sleeper hold applied with precision rendered him unconscious in seconds. The second turned toward the sound, but Sarah's military training kicked in, a precise strike to specific nerve points that caused immediate paralysis. With both guards neutralized, Sarah began dismantling their communication equipment. She couldn't destroy it completely without alerting the others, but she could introduce subtle malfunctions that would degrade their coordination. More importantly, she accessed their satellite communications system and discovered intelligence that changed everything. The package they were expecting wasn't just any high-value target. According to the encrypted files, they were treating Dmitry Volkov, a Russian intelligence operative who had stolen classified information about NATO military installations. He'd been shot during his escape from a safe house in Canada and was being transported to Clearwater General because it was remote enough to avoid immediate detection. But the federal agents tracking them weren't just concerned about the theft. Volkov carried information about planned terrorist attacks on American soil, and his captors intended to extract that intelligence through enhanced interrogation once he was medically stable. Sarah realized this operation was about more than just treating a wounded spy. They were using the hospital as a temporary black site for extracting classified information. The moral complexity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. Volkov was a foreign agent who had stolen American secrets, but he was also a human being who deserved medical treatment. The mercenaries were criminals holding innocent people hostage, but they were also trying to recover stolen intelligence that could save American lives. Her military oath had included defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but her medical oath required her to protect innocent life above all else. The decision was made for her when she heard Jake Morrison's voice over the security radio. "Sarah, they're moving patients to the basement. Something's wrong. They're separating the staff into different groups." The contingency protocols had begun early. Sarah abandoned the communication center and made her way toward the basement, where she could see through security cameras that the mercenaries were indeed segregating the hospital staff. Medical personnel were being kept separate from administrative staff and maintenance workers. The medical staff would be kept alive until their patient was stable. The others were becoming expendable. Moving through corridors she now knew better than her own home, Sarah began the most dangerous phase of her plan. She had weapons, tactical gear, and the element of surprise. But she was one person against a professional military unit, and the lives of nearly 300 people hung in the balance. The first mercenary she encountered was patrolling the stairwell between the second and third floors. He never had a chance to call for help. Sarah's military training included close-quarters combat, and years of suppressed muscle memory guided her movements. But taking a life, even in defense of others, brought back memories she'd tried to forget. The weight of her rifle in Afghanistan, the calculations of wind speed and distance, the moment when training overcame conscience and a trigger was pulled. She was no longer just Sarah Mitchell, a small-town nurse. She was once again Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps, and she had a mission to complete. The next mercenary was more alert, but Sarah had advantages they didn't expect. She knew every inch of this building, every blind spot and concealed position. More importantly, she understood that they needed to maintain hospital operations, which limited their tactical options. As she prepared for the most dangerous phase of her operation, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would save as many people as possible, but she wouldn't let anyone die for the sake of protecting stolen secrets or international politics. The small-town nurse was gone. The Marine sniper had returned. The hospital's basement became a maze of terror as Sarah realized the mercenaries had split their operation into multiple simultaneous missions. Through the security feeds, she watched in horror as Kozlov's team divided the staff and patients into 3 distinct groups, each serving a different purpose in their endgame strategy. Dr. Amanda Foster and the pediatric nursing staff were being held in the children's ward under heavy guard. Their group included 43 children and 8 medical personnel, kept alive because injured children would create public outrage that could complicate the mercenaries' extraction. The essential surgical team, including Dr. Webb and Dr. Chen, was being moved to a makeshift secure area near the operating theaters. They were the most valuable assets needed to keep their incoming patient alive. Everyone else, administrators, maintenance workers, non-essential medical staff, and visitors, was being herded into the hospital cafeteria. Sarah counted 57 people in this group, and the mercenaries' radio chatter made their fate clear. Non-essential personnel to be contained until extraction complete. Contingency 7 if complications arise. Sarah knew the military code. Contingency 7 meant elimination of witnesses. Her first challenge came when she tried to reach Jake Morrison, who had been separated from her during the chaos. Through the security system, she spotted him trapped in the hospital's main pharmacy with 3 other security guards. They were surrounded by mercenaries who seemed to be using them to test the hospital's lockdown procedures. The German woman, who Sarah now knew was called Freya based on radio transmissions, was personally overseeing the pharmacy situation. She spoke to the trapped guards through the intercom. "Gentlemen, you have medical supplies that our patient will require. Cooperate fully, and you will survive this experience." Sarah realized this was more than containment. They were systematically extracting everything they needed for a complex medical procedure, while maintaining psychological pressure on key personnel. To reach Jake, Sarah would have to cross the main corridor, which was now under constant surveillance. But she had noticed something during her years working night shifts. The hospital's old pneumatic tube system, once used to transport lab samples and medications between floors, was still functional in many areas. The tubes were narrow, designed for small packages, but the maintenance shafts that housed them were large enough for a person to crawl through. Sarah had discovered this during a power outage months earlier, when she'd helped maintenance workers access damaged electrical systems. Entering the tube system through a maintenance panel near the morgue, Sarah began a claustrophobic journey through the hospital's hidden arteries. The metal shafts amplified every sound, and she had to move with absolute silence to avoid detection. Halfway to the pharmacy, she encountered her first major obstacle, a junction where the tube system intersected with the hospital's main air conditioning duct. Voices echoed from below, two mercenaries discussing their timeline. The extraction team reports headwinds. ETA now 0930 hours instead of 0800, one was saying. Kozlov won't like the delay. We're already operating on razor-thin margins, the other replied. Sarah filed this information away. A 90-minute delay gave her more time, but it also meant the mercenaries would be under increased pressure, making them more dangerous and unpredictable. Continuing through the shaft system, she reached the pharmacy area and carefully observed the situation through a ventilation grate. Jake and the other guards were being forced to compile specific medical supplies under Freya's supervision. The German woman was clearly experienced with medical equipment. She knew exactly what she was ordering. Sarah's military training included improvised explosive devices, and the pharmacy contained everything she needed to create diversions. But any explosion near the medical supplies could harm Jake and the other guards. Instead, she opted for a more subtle approach. Using a medical syringe loaded with a sedative mixture, she accessed the air conditioning system feeding the pharmacy. A precisely calculated dose would make the mercenaries drowsy without affecting their hostages significantly. The plan worked better than expected. Within 10 minutes, both guards flanking Freya began showing signs of fatigue. When one sat down to rest, Sarah struck. Dropping silently from the ceiling vent, she landed behind Freya and applied a sleeper hold with clinical precision. The German woman was well trained and fought back, but Sarah's years of hand-to-hand combat training gave her the advantage. "Jake, secure their weapons," Sarah whispered as Freya lost consciousness. "Sarah, how did you—" "Never mind, we've got bigger problems. They're planning something in the surgical wing that requires massive amounts of blood products and experimental drugs." One of the other guards, an older man named David Chen, stared at Sarah in amazement. "You're just a nurse. How do you know how to fight like that?" "Long story," Sarah replied, binding Freya with medical tape. "Right now, we need to reach the other groups before the situation gets worse." Through Freya's radio, they could hear Kozlov's growing frustration. "Beta team, report status on non-essential containment." "Cafeteria secure, sir. 57 individuals contained and controlled." "Surgical preparation?" 90% complete. Dr. Webb is cooperating fully. The operating theater will be ready within 2 hours." Sarah made a tactical decision that would define the next phase of the crisis. They couldn't save everyone simultaneously, but they could prioritize based on immediate threat levels. The children in the pediatric ward were safest for now. Harming them would create public relations nightmares. The surgical team was valuable until their patient arrived and was stabilized. But the 57 people in the cafeteria were in immediate danger once the mercenaries no longer needed perfect operational security. "Jake, I need you and David to reach Dr. Foster in pediatrics. Use the maintenance corridors and this radio frequency," she said, handing them Freya's communication device. "Tell her to prepare for possible evacuation through the old steam tunnels." "What about you?" Jake asked. "I'm going to the cafeteria. Those people have maybe 6 hours before they become liabilities." Sarah's journey to the cafeteria took her through parts of the hospital she'd never accessed before. The basement level included old fallout shelter areas from the Cold War era, complete with reinforced walls and independent ventilation systems. But it also revealed something troubling. The mercenaries had been planning this operation for months. They'd positioned additional equipment and supplies throughout the hospital, hidden in areas that suggested extensive reconnaissance and preparation. In a storage room near the cafeteria, Sarah discovered a cache of advanced military equipment, night vision goggles, encrypted communication devices, and weapons that were definitely not standard mercenary gear. This was government-level hardware. The implications were staggering. Either these mercenaries had access to military suppliers, or they were working with the backing of a nation-state. Treating one wounded spy wouldn't justify this level of resources and planning. Her suspicions were confirmed when she intercepted a satellite communication in the storage room. Moscow base, this is Raven Leader. Package delivery delayed but proceeding. Secondary objectives remain viable. Recommend proceeding with Phase 2 upon medical stabilization. Phase 2. There was more to this operation than treating Dmitry Volkov. Sarah accessed the cafeteria through the kitchen service entrance, where she could observe the hostage situation without immediate detection. The 57 civilians were being guarded by 8 mercenaries, with additional support nearby. But what she saw made her blood run cold. The mercenaries were setting up what appeared to be an execution scenario. Plastic sheeting on the floor, positioned lighting, and video equipment suggested they were planning to record whatever happened to these people. This wasn't just about eliminating witnesses. They were planning to create a message. Sarah realized she was facing something far more complex than a medical extraction. This was a terrorist operation designed to send a message to the U.S. government, using innocent American civilians as both shields and symbols. The small-town hospital had become ground zero for an international incident that could trigger diplomatic crises or worse. And Sarah Mitchell, former Marine sniper turned pediatric nurse, was the only person in position to prevent a massacre. But she was also running out of time. Through the kitchen service window, she could see the mercenaries checking their watches and speaking in urgent whispers. Their timeline was accelerating, and their patience with maintaining the facade of a simple medical operation was wearing thin. Sarah had to make a choice: attempt to rescue the cafeteria hostages and risk exposing her position, or focus on gathering intelligence about Phase 2 and potentially save more lives in the long run. The decision was made for her when she heard a child's scream echoing from the floors above. Dr. Foster's voice followed, sharp with medical urgency. "I need the crash cart now. Tommy's going into cardiac arrest." The mercenaries' careful plans were beginning to unravel as the reality of managing a functioning hospital under siege created complications they hadn't anticipated. Medical emergencies couldn't be scheduled or controlled, and their efforts to maintain operational security while providing life-saving care were creating critical vulnerabilities. Sarah smiled grimly as she prepared for the next phase of her operation. Sometimes the best weapon against a complex plan was simple human need. The Marines had taught her that no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, but they'd never taught her what to do when innocent children became part of the battlefield. The medical emergency in pediatrics triggered a cascade of events that shattered Kozlov's carefully orchestrated plan. Tommy Henderson, an 8-year-old recovering from heart surgery, went into full cardiac arrest just as the mercenaries were finalizing their execution preparations in the cafeteria. Dr. Foster's desperate calls for assistance forced the mercenaries into an impossible position: allow medical personnel to save the child's life or maintain strict security protocols. Kozlov made a decision that revealed the operation's true priorities. He ordered 4 guards to escort the entire pediatric medical team to assist with the emergency. Sarah watched through security cameras as chaos erupted throughout the hospital. The mercenaries' rigid command structure began breaking down under the pressure of managing a genuine medical crisis while maintaining their hostage operations. The situation deteriorated further when she intercepted a communication that made her stomach drop. Moscow base confirms American intelligence has broken our encryption. They know about Volkov, they know about the hospital, and they know about Phase 2. Phase 2. Sarah still didn't understand what the secondary operation entailed, but the panic in the mercenaries' voice suggested it was catastrophic in scope. But the real disaster came when federal agents arrived 6 hours earlier than expected. The first sign was Kozlov's radio crackling with urgent transmissions. "Raven Leader, this is Overwatch. Federal vehicles spotted 2 kilometers out. Multiple agencies. They know our location." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what this meant. The mercenaries' contingency protocols would now be implemented immediately. Every civilian in the hospital had just become expendable. Through the kitchen service window, she watched as the guards in the cafeteria received new orders. They began separating the hostages into smaller groups, and Sarah could see them preparing zip-tie restraints and positioning what looked like improvised explosive devices. The execution wasn't planned for hours from now. It was about to begin. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison's voice crackled through Freya's stolen radio. "Sarah, wherever you are, they're wiring the children's ward with explosives. Dr. Foster is trying to evacuate the babies, but they won't let her move the critical patients." Sarah's tactical situation had become impossible. She was one person with limited ammunition, facing professional soldiers who were now operating under kill orders. The federal agents outside couldn't storm the building without triggering a massacre, and Sarah couldn't save everyone simultaneously. Her military training had prepared her for many scenarios, but never one where every choice led to innocent deaths. The mathematics of survival had become brutal. Save the cafeteria hostages, and the children die. Save the children, and 57 adults die. Try to save everyone and lose them all. Then Tommy Henderson died. Despite Dr. Foster's heroic efforts and 40 minutes of continuous resuscitation attempts, the 8-year-old couldn't be revived. The sound of medical equipment flatlined echoed through the pediatric ward, followed by Dr. Foster's anguished cry, "No, no, no! Come back, Tommy!" Through the security cameras, Sarah watched Dr. Foster collapse beside the small body, her shoulders shaking with grief and exhaustion. The other children in the ward began crying, sensing that something terrible had happened. Several of the teenage patients understood exactly what the flatline sound meant. The death of an innocent child changed everything for Sarah. This was no longer about international espionage or terrorist operations. It was about innocent people dying, while she had the skills to prevent it. She thought about her therapy sessions after returning from Afghanistan, where Dr. Elizabeth Warren had helped her process the guilt of being unable to save everyone. "You can't carry the weight of every life you couldn't save," Dr. Warren had said, "but you can honor them by saving the ones you can." Sarah made a decision that would haunt her forever. She chose to save who she could, even if it meant sacrificing others. But first, she needed to understand what Phase 2 involved. If the mercenaries were planning something beyond the hospital takeover, stopping it might save more lives than any tactical rescue she could attempt. Accessing the communications equipment she'd compromised earlier, Sarah began tracing the mercenaries' external connections. What she discovered made her realize the hospital takeover was just the beginning of a much larger plot. The satellite communications revealed coordination with sleeper cells in 3 major American cities: Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta. Phase 2 involved synchronized attacks on major medical facilities during peak operating hours, designed to maximize casualties and demonstrate that nowhere in America was safe. The timeline was horrifying. The attacks were scheduled to begin the moment Dmitry Volkov was either successfully extracted or confirmed dead. His medical treatment had been a diversionary tactic, drawing federal attention to rural Montana, while terrorist cells prepared to strike population centers. Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting to save the people in Clearwater General. She was potentially the only person in position to prevent a coordinated domestic terrorist attack that could kill thousands. The weight of this knowledge transformed her understanding of the situation. Every decision she made in the next few hours wouldn't just affect the hospital. It could determine whether families across America woke up tomorrow morning. Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized the mercenaries' greatest weakness wasn't tactical. It was psychological. They were professional soldiers operating in a medical environment, surrounded by suffering civilians and dying children. The cognitive dissonance was affecting their performance in measurable ways. She'd noticed it in small details: hesitation before following orders that put patients at risk, frustration when medical emergencies disrupted their security protocols, and growing tension between maintaining operational discipline and basic human empathy. More importantly, she'd identified a critical flaw in their communication network. The mercenaries were using encrypted military radios, but they were also relying on the hospital's internal communication system for coordination with medical staff. Sarah had access to both networks from her position in the security office. Her plan required exploiting this weakness on multiple fronts simultaneously while using her knowledge of Phase 2 to create maximum disruption. First, she accessed the hospital's emergency broadcast system and began transmitting carefully crafted medical information that would force the mercenaries to make impossible choices. Code Blue, pediatric ward, multiple cardiac arrests, all available medical personnel respond immediately. The announcement was false, but it created exactly the chaos Sarah needed. The mercenaries couldn't verify the emergency without compromising their positions, but they couldn't ignore it without risking their mission's success. Simultaneously, she began broadcasting on their encrypted frequency using Freya's captured radio, Raven Leader, this is Overwatch. Phase 2 authorization codes compromised. Abort Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta operations immediately. The transmission was a calculated gamble. Sarah was betting that the hierarchical structure of military operations would create confusion and delay while subordinates sought confirmation of the abort order. Kozlov's response confirmed her strategy was working. Overwatch, confirm abort authorization. Repeat, confirm abort codes. While the mercenaries scrambled to verify the false abortion order and respond to the fake medical emergency, Sarah moved through the basement toward the cafeteria hostages. She had approximately 4 minutes before they realized they'd been deceived by someone with intimate knowledge of both their communication protocols and the hospital's operations. Her military training had included what was euphemistically called target-rich environments, situations where multiple enemies had to be neutralized rapidly with limited resources. The cafeteria presented exactly such a scenario, but with additional complications. 8 guards, 57 hostages, and 1 small-town nurse with a stolen assault rifle. But the hostages weren't just civilians. They included hospital staff who knew the building's layout, maintenance workers who understood the infrastructure, and security personnel who could assist in evacuation procedures. Sarah's first shot took out the guard positioned near the explosive devices. Her sniper training made the 40-meter shot through the kitchen service window seem routine, but the sound of gunfire triggered immediate chaos that she had to control precisely. "Everyone stay down. I'm a hospital staff member," Sarah shouted as she moved into the cafeteria proper. "Security guards, identify yourselves." 3 voices responded from different positions in the room. Sarah quickly coordinated with them while engaging the remaining mercenaries. The remaining guards tried to use hostages as human shields, but Sarah had positioned herself with overlapping fields of fire and the assistance of people who knew which staff members could help coordinate evacuation. Her second and third shots eliminated the guards closest to the largest groups of civilians. The security guards she'd identified began moving people toward predetermined exit routes while Sarah maintained covering fire. The 4th guard went down when he tried to flank her position, but not before wounding Janet Rivers, one of the administrative staff. Sarah's combat medic training kicked in as she applied pressure to the wound while continuing to monitor for threats. The 5th and 6th mercenaries were eliminated when they attempted to radio for backup. Sarah couldn't allow them to call in reinforcements or confirm that the abort order had been fake. But the real tactical breakthrough came when David Chen, the security guard she'd met in the pharmacy, revealed information that changed everything. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about the hospital's old emergency systems. During the Cold War, this place was designed as a potential fallout shelter. There are blast doors and independent systems that most people don't know about." The 7th guard managed to wound her, a graze across her left shoulder that burned like fire but didn't impair her shooting arm. Sarah's return fire was precise and final, but Chen's information had given her a new strategy. The 8th guard surrendered when he realized he was alone, surrounded by freed hostages, and facing a woman who had just demonstrated professional-level combat skills, with support from people who knew the building better than he did. "Please," he begged in accented English, "I have children." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him while speaking to the hostages. Everyone moved toward the emergency exits. Use the stairwells, not the elevators. Get as far from the building as possible. But before the civilians could escape, Kozlov's voice echoed through the hospital's intercom system. "Unknown shooter, you have just signed the death warrant for every child in the pediatric ward. You have also doomed thousands of innocents in Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta. Phase 2 is now active. Surrender immediately, or we begin executing them one by one." The hostages stopped moving toward the exits. Several began crying. They all looked at Sarah, waiting for her decision. Sarah realized she'd won the battle but potentially triggered a larger war. She'd saved 57 people, but now 43 children were in immediate danger, and her false abortion order had apparently accelerated the very attacks she'd hoped to prevent. Chen approached her with maps of the hospital's emergency systems. These blast doors can compartmentalize sections of the building. If we can reach the control room, we might be able to isolate the pediatric ward and protect the children until federal agents can intervene. Sarah studied the maps, her tactical mind processing possibilities. The blast door controls were located in the hospital's original command center, built during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Reaching it would require crossing 3 floors of hostile territory, but it offered a way to protect the children without direct confrontation. "How long until Phase 2 activates in the other cities?" she asked the captured mercenary. 30 minutes, he replied reluctantly, but only if Kozlov confirms the hospital operation is compromised. Sarah made a decision that combined her nursing instincts with her military training. Instead of attempting a direct rescue of the pediatric ward, she would try to save both the children and prevent the coordinated attacks by eliminating the command structure before Kozlov could send the confirmation signal. The standoff lasted exactly 17 minutes, the time it took for Sarah to make her way from the cafeteria to the pediatric ward through routes only she knew existed, while simultaneously coordinating with David Chen to activate the hospital's emergency blast door system. Chen had reached the Cold War-era command center and was manually overriding decades-old security protocols. "Sarah, I can isolate the pediatric ward in 3 minutes, but you need to be inside when I activate the blast doors. Once they're sealed, nothing gets in or out for at least 6 hours." Sarah moved through the old steam tunnels that connected the hospital to the abandoned heating plant across the street. These passages had been built in the 1940s and forgotten by everyone except maintenance workers and night shift nurses who'd explored them during quiet hours. The tunnels brought her up through the hospital's original foundation, emerging in the pediatric ward's supply closet, directly behind the mercenaries' defensive positions. Through the closet's small window, Sarah could see the tactical situation. Kozlov and 4 remaining guards had barricaded themselves in the children's ward with Dr. Foster, 2 nurses, and 38 surviving children. They'd positioned the children as human shields, while maintaining clear fields of fire toward the main entrances. But they hadn't anticipated an attack from behind, and they definitely hadn't planned for the hospital's ancient emergency systems to be activated against them. Jake Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Sarah, federal agents are preparing to breach the building, but they're waiting for your signal. They know about Phase 2 now. Someone intercepted the communications you disrupted. Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta teams are being arrested simultaneously, but only if we can prevent Kozlov from sending the activation signal." Sarah realized she had multiple objectives: save the children, prevent the terrorist attacks, and survive long enough to see justice done. Her sniper training had included what instructors called surgical shooting, eliminating targets in close proximity to civilians with zero margin for error. It was the most difficult skill a marksman could master, requiring absolute precision under extreme pressure. She had one opportunity. If she missed, if her timing was off by milliseconds, children would die and terrorist attacks would proceed across 3 American cities. But first, she needed to create an advantage that went beyond marksmanship. Through the supply closet's ventilation system, she could access the pediatric ward's medical gas supply, oxygen, nitrous oxide, and other compounds used for patient care. Sarah's military training had included improvised chemical weapons, but her medical training suggested a different approach. By adjusting the gas mixture entering the ward, she could create a non-lethal but incapacitating atmosphere that would affect the mercenaries without harming the children. Working quickly with medical supplies from the closet, Sarah rigged a delivery system that would introduce a mild sedative gas through the ward's ventilation. The concentration would be too low to harm children or medical staff, but sufficient to make armed adults drowsy and less accurate. After activating the gas delivery system, Sarah positioned herself for shots that would require her to thread bullets between children's heads to reach her targets. The angles were impossible by normal standards, but her military training had prepared her for impossible shots. 3 minutes after the gas began circulating, Sarah noticed the mercenaries beginning to show signs of fatigue. Their reaction times were slowing, their grip on weapons becoming less steady. Her first shot eliminated the guard positioned nearest to the incubators containing premature babies. The man fell silently, his weapon clattering away from the infants, but his fall alerted the others to Sarah's position. Her second shot took out the mercenary, threatening Dr. Foster. The bullet passed within inches of a 6-year-old girl named Emma Patterson. But Sarah's calculations were perfect. The child was unharmed, but the guard's protective vest couldn't stop a precision shot placed at the junction of the neck and shoulder. The third mercenary turned toward Sarah's position but was moving sluggishly due to the sedative gas. Sarah's shot found its mark before he could bring his weapon to bear. Kozlov spun toward the source of the shots, using a teenager named Marcus Williams as a human shield. But Sarah could see that the mercenary leader was also affected by the gas. His movements were slower, his grip on the boy less secure. "Show yourself!" Kozlov shouted, but his voice was slightly slurred. "Face me like a soldier!" Sarah emerged from the supply closet, her weapon trained on Kozlov's head. The pediatric ward fell silent, except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and the quiet sobs of frightened children. "Let the children go." "This is between us now," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps," Kozlov said, recognition dawning in his eyes despite the effects of the sedative gas. "I know who you are. Kandahar Province, 2018, you killed my brother." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. This entire operation hadn't just been about treating a wounded spy or extracting intelligence. It had been personal revenge, planned and executed by someone who'd spent years hunting her, using innocent civilians as weapons in his quest for vengeance. "Your brother was Dmitry Kozlov, Taliban collaborator and weapons dealer," Sarah replied, her weapon never wavering. "He was using children as suicide bombers. I'd kill him again." "Perhaps you would," Kozlov said, his grip on Marcus Williams loosening as the sedative continued to affect his coordination. "But first, you'll watch these children die, just like the ones you failed to save in Afghanistan. And then Phase 2 will proceed, and thousands more will die in his memory." Sarah could see Kozlov reaching for a radio transmitter with his free hand, the device that would signal the terrorist cells to proceed with their attacks. She had seconds to act. "The difference," Sarah said quietly, "is that I learned from my mistakes." Her final shot was the most difficult of her career, a bullet that had to pass within millimeters of Marcus Williams's ear to reach Kozlov's brainstem. The teenager felt the heat of the projectile but suffered no injury. Kozlov collapsed, his radio transmitter clattering across the floor. The remaining 2 guards surrendered immediately when they realized their leader was dead and federal agents were storming the building. As Sarah lowered her weapon, Dr. Foster approached with tears in her eyes. Several children were crying, but they were alive and unharmed. Marcus Williams sat down heavily, shaking from the proximity of death but grateful to be breathing. "How many people did you save tonight?" Dr. Foster asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked around the pediatric ward at the children who would go home to their families, thought about the 57 civilians who'd escaped from the cafeteria, considered the federal agents who were now arresting terrorist cells in 3 major cities, and reflected on the thousands of potential victims who would never know how close they'd come to tragedy. She thought about Tommy Henderson, whose death had motivated her to act. She thought about her brother in Afghanistan, whose memory had driven Kozlov to seek revenge. She thought about all the lives that had intersected in this small-town hospital on this one terrible night. "Enough," she said simply, but her voice carried the weight of every decision she'd made. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell received the Medal of Valor from the President of the United States in a ceremony closed to the public. The official report classified her actions as extraordinary heroism in defense of civilian lives under extreme circumstances, but it couldn't capture the full scope of what had occurred that night. The investigation revealed that Kozlov's operation had been planned for over 2 years, with intelligence gathering, infiltration attempts, and resource positioning that demonstrated sophisticated planning and significant financial backing. The terrorist cells in Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta had been prepared to attack major medical facilities during peak operating hours, potentially killing thousands of civilians. Dmitry Volkov, the wounded Russian spy, died en route to the hospital when his transport helicopter was intercepted by federal agents alerted by Sarah's communications intercepts. The intelligence he carried led to the prevention of 3 additional terrorist plots and the identification of a broader network of operatives. Dr. Amanda Foster received a commendation for her efforts to protect the children during the crisis and continued her work in pediatric medicine. She often spoke to Sarah about the importance of preparation and courage in the face of impossible circumstances. Jake Morrison was promoted to head of security at Clearwater General Hospital and implemented new emergency protocols based on lessons learned during the siege. David Chen became his deputy, specializing in the hospital's emergency systems and Cold War-era infrastructure. Dr. Marcus Webb returned to surgery with a new appreciation for the courage required in life-or-death situations. He established the Tommy Henderson Memorial Fund to support pediatric cardiac care for families who couldn't afford treatment. Sarah returned to work at Clearwater General Hospital, where she continued her duties as a pediatric nurse. Her colleagues noticed she seemed more confident, more willing to take charge during medical emergencies, and more protective of the children under her care. But they attributed this to her experience during the incident, as it came to be known locally. What they didn't know was that Sarah had made peace with both sides of her identity, the Marine who'd learned to take lives when necessary, and the nurse who'd dedicated herself to saving them. She understood now that both roles were part of the same calling, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The hospital installed a memorial garden in Tommy Henderson's honor, where families could find peace during difficult times. Sarah often paused there during her rounds, remembering not just the child who died, but all the children who'd lived because of the choices made that night. Sometimes the skills we try to leave behind are exactly what the world needs us to remember. Sometimes the past we're running from becomes the foundation for the future we're meant to build. In room 314, where a small plaque now honored Tommy Henderson's memory, Sarah often paused during her rounds to remind herself why both parts of her training mattered. She was a guardian, whether holding a rifle or a stethoscope. And she was ready for whatever came next, because she'd learned that heroism isn't about the weapons you carry. It's about the courage to use whatever skills you have to protect the innocent, even when the cost might be everything you hold dear. The small-town nurse with the hidden past had become something new, a protector who understood that sometimes the greatest act of mercy is the willingness to take action when others cannot. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.